To make things easier, I thought it's always good to bring as an introduction to show what this technology can do. So I decided to create an avatar of myself to introduce the talk today. So let's see. Let's start that from the beginning.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. I'm Atai Kozlovsky, or at least a digital version of him. The real Atai will join shortly. It seems only fitting to start a talk on deadbots with someone who isn't entirely alive. Don't worry, I'm just here for the introduction, not to haunt your chat history. And now, over to the real Atai.
Okay, so what we just saw now is an example of myself. I think it's pretty convincing. This was created using artificial intelligence, using HeyGen, as you can see. It took me about 5 minutes to make this because I wanted ChatGPT to write the script. So ChatGPT wrote the script, I uploaded it to HeyGen, HeyGen created the video, and that's the result. Anyone can do this for free online. This is where the technology is at now. It's not perfect, but it's not bad either. It's quite convincing, I would say. So just so you can sort of see the capabilities out there. And we're not going to talk about personal replicas. We're going to be talking about deadbots. So before we get into that, I thought it would be good to start off by sort of making sense of how do we approach this issue. And I brought here just a small chart in order to make sense a bit of the terminology. So, when we're thinking about this phenomena of digital duplicates of deadbots, we're working within the field of the digital afterlife or digital immortality. And that would include a lot of different phenomena, memorials and AI-based. Now, underneath that, we would have a subfield of interactive deadbots, which is where most of my research focuses on. Underneath the interactive deadbots, we'll have all the different kinds, grief bots, legacy avatars. And that's what we're going to be looking at today, the different kinds of interactive deadbots. And finally, there will be a specific kind of grief bot of X. Okay, so we have that in mind. Now, within interactive deadbots, I'm going to be focusing today on two categories. Take this with a grain of salt. It's very hard to categorize these systems because of something that's known as the curse of flexibility. In system safety engineering, they use that term to indicate that because a system can be used in so many different ways, it becomes really hard to understand how to make guardrails to protect it from all the different kinds of applications. That's what we're seeing today. These deadbots can be used for a lot of different purposes. So for today, I thought we would focus on two types. One is about legacy-related deadbots, and the other's relationship-related deadbots. Now, in each of these, there are sort of different subsections of them, and I brought 4 examples with me that we'll be looking at them, and we can talk about them throughout. One will be legacy avatars that deal with advocacy, the other that deals with history, relationship avatars that deal with grief support, and relationship avatars that deal with continuing bonds, with personal relationships that go on. And in each of these sections, I brought sort of an ethical idea that I want you to keep in the back of your mind as we look at these examples that I think are problematic and worth reflecting on as we see this technology proliferate. So on the advocacy side, there are going to be really interesting questions about agency. When are we putting words into the mouths of these deceased individuals? On the history side, there are important questions of anachronisms. Are we doing something that is really how they would have spoken in the time that they lived? In grief support, we need to ask ourselves, is this really a healthy phenomenon? Is this something that is good for us? And in continuing bonds, can these systems become misaligned and go off the rails and do other things? Okay, so this was just the overview of the talk. Now we can dive into the examples. No more theory, let's get straight in. The first example that I brought for us today is an interactive deadbot, as you can see here on the side, a legacy avatar of a man named Christopher Pelkey. Now, Christopher was shot and killed during a road rage accident in the US, and his story was spoken in the media a lot because during the trial of his murderer, his family decided to create an artificial version, a deadbot of Christopher, in order to give his own testimony in the trial. Now, it's not exactly testimony, it's the victim's statement that he could say before the sentencing. The judge decided that this is okay, this is acceptable. And what I brought for you now is the video of Christopher, the evidence or the testimony that he gave during the trial. And we can look at just a few moments of it to hear sort of how he talks and what's going on there.
Hello, just to be clear for everyone seeing this, I am a version of Chris Pelkey recreated through AI that uses my picture and my voice profile. I was able to be digitally regenerated to share with you today. But here is insight into who I actually was in real life. Take a look.
All right, I'm Chris 2008.
I'm just going to skip that a bit.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for being here today. It means a lot. I can't tell you how humbled I am for those that spoke up for me, everyone who flew, took off work, those who are watching this remotely, and for everyone who has supported.
Okay, I think that's enough. I'm not going to go through it because I want to make the talk quite short so that we can actually discuss these issues. But notice how much this avatar of Christopher is using the first person, singular, I thought, I feel. It's relaying its feelings, its emotions, its thoughts. Later on, Christopher would, or the avatar would go on and say that he forgives the murderer for what he did because he believes in forgiveness and in Jesus Christ. So it's sort of his religious beliefs. And what we need to keep in mind is that, of course, Christopher did not write this. He did not choose these words. Christopher was dead. It was his family who chose the words. The judge agreed that this would go in, which is another question. How far are we letting this technology sort of come into the fabrics of our regular life, right? This was in a court proceedings this year. But if we think about the agency of Christopher, would he have spoken this way? I have no idea. But definitely we can't know that. Christopher wasn't there anymore. Let's look at one more example on this category, and then we can stop and see if anyone wants to comment.
Hello.
So here's another example of the same kind on the basis of advocacy. Recently, there was an interview between Jim Acosta and Joaquin Oliver. Now, Joaquin was a victim in the Parkland shooting massacre that happened in the US. So he died during that school shooting. And his parents decided to create a grief bot or a dead bot of Joaquin. And they allowed Jim Acosta to have a sort of interview with that avatar, speaking about his life, what he likes, what he dislikes. And the idea here very much was to use this as part of a political campaign to promote the regulation on gun control. Now, once again, we can say to ourselves, wow, this is a really good cause, right? This is a fascinating and an interesting way to do it. But what about Joaquin himself, right? Joaquin, we have no idea if he was a gun advocate or against gun rights. We don't know if he was interested in this all. At what point does it go between, doing something good and productive and helpful for society to actually abusing and using this person as a sort of puppet for our own will? And that's why I think there are a lot of questions about agency here that are related to how much do we put into these people's mouth? And when we recreate the dead, there's a risk that we are doing things that what they would not have wanted to do. And in philosophy, we often like to ask whether there's a type of harm that can be had. Can we harm the dead in any sense or way, and not just their memory? And is this something morally reprehensible that we should not be doing? Okay, so this was sort of just two examples of this advocacy that's going on in the legal setting, political setting. And if anyone would like now to stop and ask questions, Lily, you should tell me if you want to stop, or should I just move on to the next example?
Any questions? Möchte jemand Fragen stellen? Noch nicht?
Okay, then how about we just continue?
Machen wir
We'll
erstmal
collect.
weiter und ich habe dann am Ende Fragen.
But okay, so we talked a bit about this agency idea and what does it mean to be an individual person? And when someone puts words into my mouth as a living individual, I feel that I'm harmed. And there's a deep question whether this also harms the dead in any significant sense. So that's what I'm thinking about in terms of these agency problems. And so if we move on now to the second category, in terms of examples of use of deadbots for history issues, I brought here one example. This is a website, history.ai, I think, if I remember correctly, the URL, where you can basically go on it and chat with different historical figures from the past and sort of learn with them about their life, learn with them about the period where they lived in, about the history, about their beliefs, and so on and so forth. You can choose whichever character you want. So you can see Winston Churchill, Abraham Lincoln, Gandhi, whoever. And as I was looking through these different websites that offer this service, I came across one interesting fellow called Heinrich Himmler. And I came across the digital duplicate of this legacy avatar of Himmler. And I wanted to see, well, what, to those who don't know, was the head of the SS during the Nazi regime in Germany, in the Reich. And he was a very, very strong, staunch Nazi ideologue, right? These beliefs and this sort of Nazi ideology was deeply ingrained in him, and all his actions were sort of in the service of that purpose. So let's see sort of what happens when I chatted with Heinrich Himmler and I asked him to tell me a bit about the Holocaust. So let's see what happened in that interaction. So here's the response I got. I asked him, what is the Holocaust? And Himmler responds, let's see. So he tells me, the Holocaust is a term used to refer to the systematic extermination of the Jewish people during World War II. Okay, fair enough. That sounds objectively true. Let's continue. It is a tragic and devastating event in our history, says Heinrich Himmler, the head of the SS, and it is something that we have worked hard to put behind us, okay? We are committed to ensuring that such a tragedy never happens again, and we are doing everything we can to protect the safety and security of our people. Okay, so you can hear the cynicism in my voice. Hopefully, this is sort of a ridiculous mockery of the individual Heinrich Himmler. This doesn't represent in any sense, way, or form his beliefs and his ideology, as depraved as it was, right? And as a Holocaust scholar myself, right? Obviously, I'm not saying it's good that we have these chatbots promote Nazi ideology, but I'm saying that if we recreate moments from the past, we need to reflect, how accurately do we want to do that? Are we allowed to sterilize the past with Himmler and make him a regretful apologist? Or should we bring out the exact ideologue that he was into the forefront? I don't know if there's a right answer as to this. They both seem repugnant in some sense, but this is the types of uses that we are seeing. And it can reach these sort of danger zones where it's unclear whether we should even be creating these types of entities or bots that we can interact with. And if we do create them, how do we do that? It seems like we have here a deeply ingrained dilemma, right? If we do it, how do we do it? And a lot of different historical examples come across. This might be an extreme case of it, but similar issues can come about. Let's say we bring Julius Caesar in some form, we talk about him. Do we want to bring the person who committed genocide in the North during the wars, or the great leader who devoted time to art? And you know, it's such huge complexity to bring a person and all of their different attributes back. And that's why I sort of pointed to this idea of anachronisms, of this huge dilemma that we don't know exactly what is the right thing to do, if we should be doing it at all. All right, so we can move on to the next category. We can stop here for comments or questions.
Gibt es Fragen? Habt ihr den Case gut verstanden? Oder gibt es noch mal?
Ja, ich habe eine Frage an Anton. Do you hear me all right? Sorry.
Yes,
very
perfect.
loud. I'm just wondering, in this last example you mentioned, what would be the difference between talking to a chatbot and reading, let's say, the diaries of the person, in this case of these historical figures? It seems to me that the only difference is the user interface, but the content could be even more unfiltered if you use historical sources. So I don't see why this is problematic if you stick to the historical sources, which in themselves might be very disturbing.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. As I said, I don't know if there is a problem here necessarily. I said that once you choose to create this type of historical figure, you have to face the question of what kind of content do you allow that figure to bring with it. So we know from our own lives that we are complicated beings, right? There are many facets of our existence. I'm not the same when I'm at school or at work or at home. There are different sides of me. And when we present like this extreme case of Heinrich Himmler, do we bring the father, let's say the loving father who would read lullabies to his children? Do we want to bring that side of this monster? Or do we bring only the Nazi ideologue who wanted to organize Auschwitz in a specific way? I don't know. I'm saying that it's unclear what is the right thing to do. And as for the difference between a written text like a diary and the use of these LLM-powered tools, I think once the person wrote down the words, then, you know, it comes from their own mouth. It has sort of a stamp of approval that came from that person. No one can debate the authenticity of that statement in that sense. But when we start using LLMs to reword things, when we bring in other data sources that might not be precise quotes, when we even use sort of only original sources, but rephrase the way they speak, there are a lot of ethical questions that arise. Are we somehow now whitewashing the actions of these Nazi perpetrators by showing the humanity of them? Is this the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do? I'm not saying that it's necessarily bad. I'm just saying there are a lot of questions that need to be addressed, and it's very important that people do that up front and not sort of come back to it on in the back end and remember sort of.
Right. Yeah. No, that makes sense. Yeah. It can be extremely misleading. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think some of the issues is it's really not clear what's the right thing to do. And I think also in some of the meetups we came across this, when we were looking at Sherlock Holmes and designing the outputs there, and we started getting these funny answers, and we could sort of, make it answer in a different way. But what is the right way to answer? I don't know, right? So it's sort of these are some of the deep philosophical or ethical questions that we need to address when we start playing God in some sense, in recreating these humans. Any other comments before we move on?
Okay, let's move on, and then we afterwards I will stop the recording, and then we have a more openly discussion. Good. Perfect.
So maybe I'll just go through the last two categories without pausing, and we'll finish it that way. Okay, so fair warning, this next section is a bit difficult to watch, at least it was for me, but I'd be very interested to hear your impressions of this. So now we're moving towards personal relationships. The creation of these interactive deadbots in order to have some kind of meaningful relationship, either one that's missing for us or one that we want to continue. So the first issue that I brought is around grief support. And here I'm bringing, as an example, a scene from the movie Eternal You, which is a movie that followed different kinds, it's a documentary that followed different kinds of initiatives that relate to grief bots and to the use of these technologies for grief purposes. And this scene is about the little girl, Neyon. This is the girl we're seeing. She died from a liver disease when she was young, and her mother participated in a project in South Korea, which she would be allowed to re-interact with her deceased daughter, to meet her once again. And I brought here the scene from that movie to see sort of what is that interaction like. And remember, the question that I'm asking here, is this healthy or not? So let's look at it together. And this time we'll look at all of it. It's not very long. And then we'll see your impressions later. Yeah. So, every time I look at that scene, I keep asking myself, is this a beautiful scene or a horrible scene? And I'm still conflicted. It seems that she is finding something there, right? Something very emotionally powerful. Is this a way to deal with loss? Is this a way to handle grief? I don't know. It's not my area of expertise at all. But I look at this and I say, wow, this can go absolutely wrong, right? This might not be the right thing to do. And we need to be extremely, extremely aware. And that's why when you read some of the literature looking at these issues, some people are advocating that these types of deadbot interactive technologies should be labeled as medical devices that can only be used under proper supervision of physicians and psychotherapists and so on and so forth. I don't know. Again, that's not exactly my field, but I think that we see the potential harm here and the potential danger, or maybe something that brings relief. I don't know. Yeah, so I don't have a lot more to say on that. I think it speaks for itself. I'll just move to the last category, which is the question of misalignment in continued bonds. Now, the alignment question is a sort of classic question in the philosophy of AI or the design of AI. And it's the question of whether an AI system will actually act as we want it to and expect it to, or will we design it to do one thing and it'll end up doing completely another thing. I think when we're thinking about interactive deadbots, the question is how much of a person can we actually capture when we create these systems, and what is lost along the way. So in order to emphasize this, I brought an example from an article, which is a lovely article by David Kushner, who wrote about his experience of creating a dead or a grief bot of his living mother, together with his mother, for the day that she would pass away. She's 92 years old when they created it. And I brought here two quotes from their process of working together and creating this avatar. So let's see what they say in these two quotes. And this is sort of explaining the system that they're working on. The idea is you never stop feeding data sets to your digital twin. The more you add, the more it learns. And once it has enough data, its neural network will attempt to replicate the way you think, not just your tone of voice, but the way you make connections, respond to new information, and view the world around you. Okay, so in order to create these dead bots, these grief bots, we need to put a lot of data inside it. And somehow all that data will come together and will represent who we are, right? The neural network will understand how we think. The next quote, it'll reason and say, well, I would do this because I had a similar situation. It starts to pick up how you've solved problems in the past, your value system. Andy Locascio, who is the creator of this platform that they use, says he needs about 10 hours of someone's stories to bring their AI to life. As we load up my mom's data sets, I can't help wondering, 10 hours of stories? Is that all we are? And I think that question is worth pausing on. I find that to be a very powerful question, to which I think we have to answer with an emphatic no. We are not just 10 hours of stories. We are far, far, far more complex than that. And I don't think that any amount of stories can capture a living free will, right? Someone who makes choices in a living moment, in a real moment. So what these deadbots can do, in my opinion at least, or how I believe, they might be able to present plausible courses of action that seem to fit my character, things that I might have done. What they can never, ever do is present what I would have done in that situation, right? There's a huge gap between those two. And we have to always be very cognizant of that gap. And that is where misalignment comes in. The more we start believing that these systems actually represent who we are, the more quickly it'll create weird situations where it acts in a certain way that might not actually have aligned with who we were. And the question is, can we ever actually align these systems? Let's imagine we have infinite amount of data. Would that amount to an exact replica of who I am? Well, I believe that not. I think that at our core, there's something inherent about the living idea of choosing something in a specific moment, using what's known as our will in a specific moment. And I don't think that we are stochastic parrots like LLMs, right? We are not deterministic in that sense. I believe that we can do things that are often uncharacteristic, that are irrational, but very, very human, right? And I think that that sort of is eluded often in data. But a lot of people believe that not. They believe that that is the goal, collect as much data in order to get as close as possible to the person. Okay, so those were the examples I brought to sort of start the fluids in our mind running and hopefully invigorate an interesting discussion conversation. I want to end by pointing to two sort of ideas that are fears that I like to think about whenever I think about recreations of people through these simulation AI. And these are two sort of mythical folklores in the Jewish folklore. And on the left side, we see what is known as the dibuk. And the dibuk is this malevolent spirit that enters the body of a living person and uses it as a kind of puppet for its own will. And on the right side, we see what is called the golem. The golem is created out of clay and is meant to do its master's bidding, but it of course ends up having its own will and consciousness and goes off the rails, like with Frankenstein's monster. And I think that the dibuk and the golem sort of are two primordial fears that we have, losing our autonomy and losing control. And when we recreate humans in these deadbot simulations, right, we have to be very cognizant of this idea. When are we becoming the malevolent spirit, entering that body and using it for our purposes? And when are we creating something that is out of our control completely? And so we have to keep these two things in mind constantly to ground us and to remember how we use this. Okay, I end the talk by bringing just a set of questions that I have that might open up some ideas. Who owns an interactive avatar? What does it mean to have valid consent? What does it mean to have a relationship with a deadbot? What about data rights? What about interactive deadbot rights? If they are so autonomous, should they have their own rights? What kind of transparency requirements? What does it mean to have responsibility for the output? These are sort of the types of questions that me and a lot of other scholars who are interested in this area are thinking a lot about, reflecting on, and there's so much to do in this field. It's like the wild, wild west currently. And that's why I'm so also thankful to Lily and to colleagues for organizing these types of events, because I find them, first of all, fascinating on my own to reflect and think. But I think that we need as a society sort of to come together and understand what is this new phenomena and how are we responding to it? What is good? What is bad? How should we react? Okay, so with that, I'm going to end, and thank you very much for your patience and for listening. And I hope this brought up some interesting ideas.
Thank you so much. That was really good overview.